Welcome back, grade 7s. This is lesson 5.4, the struggle for Canada. How was the battle on the Plains of Abraham a turning point in Canadian history? We're going to learn about some key figures and some events that took place. So stick around and let's learn something. 5.4 is the lesson. The question is, how was the battle on the Plains of Abraham a turning point in Canadian history? The Plains of Abraham, you may have heard this. If you haven't, then if this is the first time you're being introduced to it, you will know it fairly well by the end of this lesson. Oh, look at these two guys, Wolfe and Montcalm. This is all about the struggle for Canada. And what we know so far is that the French and the First Nation allies, they were able to hold off the British in the Ohio Valley for quite some time. We were introduced to George Washington last lesson. We know that they were trying to take the Ohio Valley for the 13 colonies because they needed farmland, but the French, with their First Nation allies, were able to defend it very well. And we also know that the only way for Britain to secure victory in North America is if they captured the two strongholds in Quebec and in Louisbourg. So what are we going to do first? We are the British. We are going to take the first stronghold, and that's going to be the fortress at Louisbourg. And this one needed to fall first in terms of geography. This one had to go first. If we can take Louisbourg, then we can control who's going into the St. Lawrence. And this started happening in 1758. The British left Halifax and they began a blockade of Louisbourg, which meant that it was under siege, and that is one of your vocab words. So basically, here's what they did. Here's what the British did. They cut off supplies and reinforcements to the fortress at Louisbourg, which means food began to run low. Any French ships that came in with reinforcements or supplies, the British would sink, and the British then hammered the fortress with cannons. All of this lasted 7 weeks before Louisbourg finally fell into British hands. Now that Louisbourg has this very important fortress and it's under British control, they now control who can enter into the St. Lawrence, which means onward to Canada. So the St. Lawrence is now open, and in 1759, General James Wolfe leads an assault to Quebec. So he takes with him 200 ships, and the accounts, the written accounts from that time, they write about these 200 ships being 150 kilometers long. That's insane. Like that is a long line of ships. On those ships, we have 900 soldiers who are trained and ready to battle. Plus, we have 18,000 sailors. So you can definitely tell that the British mean business. And this is the beginning of the Battle of Quebec, which lasts 3 months. Now, we talked about James Wolfe, General James Wolfe, but there's also Marquis de Montcalm. He's the French commander, and he had 16,000 troops, and he had the fortress of Quebec. So the French definitely outnumbered that of the British in terms of soldiers, okay, not necessarily the sailors, but of trained troops, the French outnumbered the British. Montcalm, all he needed to do, he just needed to hold out, wait until winter, because once the St. Lawrence River freezes, the French will have secured their victory. So it would have been really easy for the French had they been able to make it to the winter. Spoiler alert, they don't make it. So what's the point of view before this battle even takes place? You can see this is a picture here. We've got, this is Quebec City. You can see the Plains of Abraham there. And Old Town Quebec in the back there. And Wolfe is on the attack. And General James Wolfe is on the attack. And he needs to draw the French out of the walled city of Quebec. Montcalm, on the other hand, he's in a well-defended fortress. And this fortress could not be blockaded like that of Louisbourg. Okay, just the way it was situated, it was impossible to lay siege to the walled city of Quebec. Plus, not only that, Montcalm and the French cannons could easily hit the British fleet because if you remember from the previous lesson, Quebec is at the narrowing of the St. Lawrence River, so it's a really easy place to defend. Montcalm, though, he was falsely under the impression that reinforcements were on the way, and all he had to do was just wait until winter, and that was a problem for Montcalm, and this is what ends up hurting him. So we've got a standoff here. For 9 weeks, there was a barrage of cannon fire from both sides. Both the French and the English were just were firing cannons at each other. And you can see there's a picture here. This is actually present-day Quebec. And if you ever go into the walled city, this is a very popular place to take pictures. The tour guides always mention it. There is a cannonball at the bottom of that tree. So this cannonball was obviously shot into the fortress of Quebec, and it imprinted into the ground, and this tree grew, and the cannonball came up with it. So that's just a little side note. It's kind of cool. The fortress was hit hard, but it does not get captured, and Montcalm stays calm, like the name Montcalm, and he keeps his soldiers inside. This is really important, and this really frustrated the British, so they turned their attention to the countryside, and they start burning farmhouses, they start destroying villages and doing all these kinds of bad things, trying to lure the French troops out of the walled city of Quebec. While this was happening, the burning of the farmhouses and the destruction of the villages, the French habitants, they are retreating into the walled city of Quebec, and now the walled city of Quebec is getting much larger in terms of population. And it's a walled city. There's only so many people that can fit inside a walled city. So Montcalm, he decides to leave and do this battle on the plains of Abraham. Okay, but how does this actually happen? Well, it's all because of something that General Wolfe does. There's no surprise, winter is coming. So Wolfe's plan to draw out the French, to draw out Montcalm, is to gather on the plains of Abraham, just outside of Quebec. And he has to do this under the cover of darkness, because if the French see this happening, they'll be prepared. We need to catch the French by surprise. So at midnight on September 12th, 1759, the British make their move. They start climbing the very steep cliffs and hillside of Quebec, and they gather by dawn on the plains of Abraham. So when dawn breaks, thousands of British troops are assembled on the plains. And now suddenly Montcalm sees this and realizes, yeah, you know what? These reinforcements, they are not coming. So Montcalm decides to leave Quebec and start fighting. This battle lasts only 15 minutes. Now, that's insanely quick. That's very fast. It was 4,400 British soldiers versus 4,000 French soldiers. In all, 13,000 soldiers died. Both Wolfe and Montcalm are in this battle. They both die. And Quebec falls because the French, they fled. They took off. And to today, present-day Canada, this is the deadliest battle that happened on Canadian soil. And if you go to Old Quebec, you can tour the Plains of Abraham. There's a museum there. It's a very interesting thing to experience and to take part in. But in this part of our story of Canada, Quebec is now laying in ruins. Everyone, both French and English, are trying to scramble for survival before winter. They're trying to find food. They're trying to find shelter. The city is in ruins. And more actually died of disease that winter than in the actual battle that was taking place. The French fled, so that means Quebec falls, and the French retreat to Montreal, where in 1760, on September 8th, they officially surrender. But this leaves a legacy on the colony. So The French and the First Nations, they controlled the St. Lawrence River Valley for over 150 years. So there is a culture that develops, there's traditions that develops, there's a language that starts to take place. And they were the first newcomers, the French that is, they were the first newcomers to what will become Canada. They were involved in the fur trade, they traveled the interior, they built these successful farms and colonies. They were Catholic, and then the Catholic Church, they laid the foundation for all kinds of public responsibility for health and education, which are rooted in Canadian values today. So, yes, in this part of our story, this is the struggle for Canada, the war over Canada. And the British do defeat the French, but the French legacy lives on in this colony up until and even past today. What I'd like you to do right now is head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.